Have you ever been so good to someone that you ended up losing them? Sit with that question for a moment. Don't answer it yet. Let it settle because what you're about to hear is going to make you uncomfortable. And that is exactly what you need. There is a trap that millions of men fall into every single day. A trap no one taught you to avoid. One that romantic movies celebrate as if it were a virtue. One your mother told you was the right thing to do. And yet it works like a slow poison in any relationship. The trap is called neediness. And most men don't even realize they've fallen into it. Think about the last time you truly liked someone. Someone who occupied the first place in your mind the moment you opened your eyes. What did you do? You probably replied to their messages within seconds. You rearranged your schedule to see them. You agreed with them even when they were wrong. You looked for any excuse to be present. And you genuinely believed that was the right thing to do. That being that attentive, that available, that devoted was going to work. But it didn't work. And this is where everything begins. Human psychology follows a ruthless logic that does not care about good intentions. It doesn't matter how much effort you put in or how many hours you spent thinking about that person. What it perceives, what it processes, what it turns into attraction or indifference is something completely different. And when you understand this mechanism, when you truly see it operating, you're going to look back and understand why things turned out the way they did. There is a 15th century philosopher whom no one would ever associate with romantic relationships. A man who wrote about princes, power, and human nature with a coldness that scandalized his era. And yet what he wrote about the human condition, about fear, respect, and the desire for control, describes with absurd precision something that happens every day in millions of conversations, dates, and relationships that grow cold without anyone understanding why. Machiavelli said that men who rely on pleading and excessive compliance always end up destroyed. He was not talking about love. He was talking about politics. But the principle is identical because attraction is not politics. But the psychology behind it is. I want you to think about something. When someone gives you everything without you asking, without earning it, without any effort on your part, what do you feel? Gratitude, perhaps? Comfort? But rarely admiration. Rarely the kind of deep respect that makes someone occupy a special place in your mind. Human value works the same way economic value does. And although it sounds cold to say it, the brain does not distinguish between those two mechanisms. What is scarce is perceived as valuable. What is abundant is perceived as disposable. When a man becomes omnipresent, predictable, always available, always accommodating, his presence stops meaning something. Not because he is a bad person, not because he doesn't deserve affection, but because the other person's brain has unconsciously coded that man as someone who has nothing better to do, that his time has no value, that his presence is not a choice but a necessity, and neediness has never generated respect in any human mind. I didn't invent this. There are decades of research in evolutionary psychology pointing in the same direction. Robert Cialdini, one of the most influential social psychologists of the 20th century, spent years studying the principles that drive human behavior. And one of the most powerful principles he identified was scarcity. The human brain is designed to value what it perceives as difficult to obtain. It is not a weakness. It is a survival mechanism engraved into the nervous system for hundreds of thousands of years. But there is something more, something that goes beyond scarcity and that very few people fully understand. The real problem with the man who pleases too much is not that he is too available. The real problem is that he has abandoned something fundamental, something that once it disappears, no amount of attention or affection can compensate for. He abandoned it so slowly, so gradually that even he didn't notice. And that thing is his own identity. There is a concept that Machiavelli called virtue. Not virtue in the moral sense, not kindness, not niceness. Virtue as strength of character, as the ability to act, as a presence that does not ask permission to exist. A man with virtue has his own direction. He has a project, a mission, something that occupies and defines him beyond any relationship. And that, paradoxically, is precisely what makes him magnetic. If you're realizing that you've spent years chasing validation instead of building the kind of presence women naturally respect, then my ebook, Magnetic Masculinity, was written for you. Inside, you'll discover the mindset shifts, confidence principles, and masculine habits that help men become more attractive, respected, and emotionally grounded. If you're ready to stop second-guessing yourself and start becoming the man others naturally gravitate toward, grab your copy through the link below. Now comes the part no one wants to hear. When a man turns a woman into the absolute center of his existence, he is not giving her love. He is transferring a burden she never asked for. The pressure of being the primary source of meaning in another person's life is crushing. And the female brain, perfectly tuned to detect weakness and strength, perceives it immediately, not as a romantic gesture, as a warning sign. Genuine attraction, the kind that survives time, the kind that creates that inexplicable chemistry we have all felt at some point, is born from respect. And respect comes from something very specific. A man who knows who he is, knows what he wants, and is not willing to negotiate it for anyone. This does not mean being cruel. It does not mean being indifferent. It does not mean building a mask of coldness and hiding behind it. It means something much deeper and much harder. It means having real boundaries, not the kind of boundaries people declare and then abandon as soon as pressure appears. Boundaries that are the natural expression of who you are and what you value. Think about this. When someone crosses one of your boundaries and you say nothing, what are they learning about you? They are learning that your boundaries are negotiable, that your comfort is secondary to theirs, that they can go one step further next time. Not necessarily because they are malicious, but because that is how human learning works. We respond to consequences. And when there are no consequences, behavior repeats and escalates. Machiavelli had an image he used when speaking about leaders. He said, "The ideal prince should be both the fox and the lion. The lion who does not fear wolves, who imposes his presence, who cannot be dragged around. And the fox who does not fall into traps, who thinks before acting, who reads situations intelligently before moving. Not blind force, not cowardly cunning, both at the same time. In the context of relationships, that means something very precise. It means that an emotionally mature man does not react impulsively when something affects him. He does not send anxiety-filled messages at 2 in the morning. He does not make scenes. He does not beg. But neither does he remain silent indefinitely out of fear of conflict. He knows when to act, knows how to act, and has the emotional discipline not to let his fears control his decisions. Emotional independence is perhaps the most misunderstood concept of all. Many people confuse it with feeling nothing, with some kind of impenetrable armor that makes nothing affect you. That is not emotional independence. That is dissociation. And it is just as destructive as excessive neediness, only in the opposite direction. Real emotional independence means you are capable of feeling without letting those feelings dictate your actions. That you can love someone deeply without that affection turning you into a hostage to their decisions. That your well-being does not depend on another person's constant validation. That if tomorrow the relationship ended, you would still have a life worth living, a purpose that gets you out of bed in the morning. An identity that is not defined by whether someone loves you or not. And this is crucial. Listen carefully. Attraction is not maintained through gestures. It is maintained through presence, through the energy of someone who is where they are because they want to be there, not because they need to be there. Someone who gives because they have something to give, not because they fear what will happen if they don't. There is an enormous difference between the two. And the human brain detects it effortlessly, even if it cannot always have articulated. There was an experiment conducted by psychologists at the University of Rochester. They studied communication patterns in couples for years and found something surprising. The relationships that worked best long-term were not the ones with the most communication. They were the ones with the most honest communication. The ones in which both people felt safe enough to say what they truly thought, even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable. Radical honesty requires one thing that very few people possess: indifference to rejection, not indifference to the person. Indifference to rejection, the ability to say what you think, knowing the other person may not like it, and accepting that possibility without it destroying you. Only someone who does not need another person's approval to feel complete can do that. And now comes something that may feel uncomfortable, something you may have avoided thinking about until now. What if the person who has sabotaged your relationships the most is not any of the people you've been with? What if it's you? Not because you are inadequate, not because you have some irreparable flaw, but because nobody taught you what it means to have a real presence, a presence that does not ask permission, a presence that does not shrink itself to fit into the space another person leaves for it. Human beings learn through models, and the models we were given, movies, TV shows, songs, all insisted on the same message. Give yourself completely. Put the other person first. Sacrifice whatever is necessary, and love will reward you. It is a beautiful message, and it is deeply damaging. Not because love does not require devotion, but because the devotion that builds something real does not come from fear of loss. It comes from the abundance of someone who has so much to give that giving costs them nothing. That is the difference. A man who gives from fear always gives too much and always receives too little. A man who gives from strength naturally calibrates, maintains balance, and creates a dynamic in which the other person also wants to give. Leadership. This word is used so much that it has lost almost all meaning. But in the context of a relationship, leadership has nothing to do with domination or control. It has to do with direction, with making decisions instead of always waiting for the other person to decide, with taking responsibility for what happens instead of staying in the comfortable position of merely reacting. Women are not looking for men who control them. They are looking for men they can lean on. And being able to lean on someone does not mean that person carries everything. It means the other person has enough solidity that being near them feels like solid ground, like a place from which growth is possible instead of a place from which one constantly has to manage someone else's anxiety. This entire conversation leads to an inevitable point, and it is the hardest one of all. To become that person, the work does not begin in the relationship. It begins much earlier. It begins in the way you relate to yourself, in whether you are capable of spending time alone without loneliness feeling unbearable, in whether you have goals that matter to you regardless of whether someone is watching, in whether you treat your own time as valuable or as something you are willing to sacrifice the moment someone asks. Identity is not something you declare. It is something you build through repeated actions over time. And every time you give in when you do not want to, every time you say yes when you wanted to say no, every time you reduce who you are so as not to make anyone uncomfortable, you are telling yourself something. You are telling your own brain that you do not deserve respect. And the brain learns. But it also learns the opposite. Every time you maintain a boundary, even when it is uncomfortable, every time you prioritize your own judgment, every time you act from who you are instead of from what you fear, you are building something. You are building the kind of person who does not need to beg for attention, who does not need to monitor other people's behavior to feel safe, who can enter any relationship from strength rather than from lack. And when you get there, when you truly get there, something changes. Not only in how others see you, the way you see yourself changes too. And that difference, that subtle yet absolutely radical difference, is what separates the men who build relationships that work from those who keep repeating the same pattern without understanding why. It is not magic. It is not a psychological trick. It is not some sophisticated power game. It is simply the natural consequence of being someone real. Someone who knows who they are, who is not afraid to be it, and who understands that the greatest attraction they can generate will never come from what they do for others. It will come from what they are for themselves. If you made it this far, you are already doing something different. You are already sitting with an uncomfortable idea instead of running from it. And that, even if it seems small, is the beginning of everything that follows. If you made it to the end of this video, comment "I made it" and I will personally reply to you. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to become part of the community and leave a like if you enjoyed it.